Hi, my name is Stephanie, and this is Art History Storytime. Today we're talking about Claude Monet's impressionistic painting, La Japonaise, for a segment I like to call Glimpse the Context. Claude Monet in the 1860s and 70s was your stereotypical struggling artist. A shy and sensitively perceptive youth, he was only 17 in 1857 when his mother died, a crushing loss of the woman who loved him and encouraged him to pursue a career in art. He remained living in Normandy with his father and aunt for financial support well into adulthood. His merchant father encouraged him to continue on with the family business of ship parts and groceries, but no, he wanted to be an artist. He was able to attend art school as a young man, and at least there was his aunt who did positively reinforce him to keep at it in the direction of art. And after a stint of mandatory military service at the age of 22, he was back in Paris to continue that sprouting art career. He debuted at the Paris Salon with two landscape pieces, La Pointe de la Hève at low tide and Mouth of the Seine at Honfleur, which, if you don't know, the Paris Salon was the authority on art at the time. Paris was the place for artists, and the Salon called the shots when it came to what was good art and what wasn't. The academic art culture was so incredibly uptight and in the box, but hey, I'm not hating on it. I personally really love a lot of European academic era art, and its tight structure leads the way to incredible and precise rendering of light and form. But anyway, Monet kept submitting work every year for about a decade, but he only got accepted a couple of times, in 66 and 68. The jurors considered his stuff to be far too radical to accept on their walls. So in the 1870s, Monet was now making works of art consistently, and befriending and learning from other artists like Pierre-Auguste Renoir and Frédéric Bazille. This was a time of growth and creative exploration into plein air and impressionism. But our boy Claude and his girlfriend Camille were still poor, and his art was not necessarily well recognized yet. Plus, his father cut off his allowance because he didn't agree with Monet's decision to be with Camille. He pisses off Daddy again every time he deliberately makes art that doesn't conform to the Salon's rigid sensibilities and requirements for what they thought was good art. How do I put this? Monet wanted some money. He needed to paint something that would sell, and hopefully quickly. His decision to paint La Japonaise came with a lot of financial motivation. It's 1876, and he's 36 years old, and probably feeling a lot of pressure at this point to get his shit together and make a decent living. He and Camille have been living together in semi-poverty for several years now. At this time, they also have a 9-year-old daughter to care for, too. He saw La Japonaise as something worthy to spend time on because of its probability of making a sale. During this time, Japonism, or Japonerie, was super on trend. Japan had recently opened trade routes with Europe, so anything from that part of the world was seen as exotic and sexy. Plenty of other artists were hopping on that Japanese bandwagon too, so why not stay current if it means you're gonna make a buck? With the trendiness of all things Asian, Europeans loved seeing themselves surrounded by and in the culture and dress of Asian cultures. Women in kimono was not a radically rare thing, but it certainly was considered very exotic. In La Japonaise, we see Camille as the model, wearing a traditional Japanese kimono in a pseudo-Japanese setting, with decorative uchiwa fans on the wall, and standing on a tatami mat. Camille, who was naturally a brunette, is depicted as a blonde. In a way, this hides her identity as Camille, and instead she just plays the role of some white European woman. In her hand, we see a Japanese fan washed in the colors of the French flag. This is another reminder that we're looking at a white woman in a Japanese costume and not an authentic Japanese scene. The fans hanging behind her vary from hazy impressionistic landscape scenes to a red-crowned crane, a fish, a woman lounging, people in a canoe, and one I can't quite make out, but to me looks like a red block or symbol. Tell me what you think in the comments. Then there's the red fan with the woman with the shocked expression. This one is positioned just right at Camille's eye level, as if the woman in the fan is shocked to see this Westerner wearing what she's wearing. The red background, a reflection of her shock. Something like what we'd see in a comic book. The kimono features an embroidered samurai wielding a sword. The dark-haired man has a severe expression and tight grip on the sword while he's in the process of removing it from the sheath. It's intense and traditionally masculine, which offers a nice contrast to Camille's soft, feminine look. Her flirty expression and her light-colored hair, the samurai being at nearly the center of the composition, makes him a sort of secondary character in this scene, even if you don't notice him right away. The critics tore it up. Monet was already gaining the reputation of being a rebel, particularly with his work Impression Sunrise, which was the painting that coined the term Impressionism as an art movement. With La Japonaise, some saw it as bizarre and sexually suggestive. Her coquettish turn of the head, together with the samurai placed right over the general zip code of her naughty parts, was seriously enough to garner negative attention. But, of course, this is Victorian-era Europe, and if it wasn't explicitly classical or biblical, any form of nudity or slight reach toward eroticism was publicly shamed. Even the samurai removing the sword from the sheath was enough to make some critics think, penis! It wasn't all negative. There was some positive criticism, though. Some notable critics praised it for its bold use of color, and yes, I would definitely agree with that. La Japonaise hasn't stopped being controversial either. The painting is housed at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and in 2015, they began to hold a weekly event called Kimono Wednesdays. The museum invited visitors to try on a replica kimono as seen in Monet's painting and pose in front of it. With good intent, it was meant to be a way for people to experience a piece of a different culture, a different moment in history, and a clever thing for social media. But it blew up in their face when protesters online and in person criticized the event as racist and promoting cultural appropriation. The painting itself, even in its time, was an example of cultural appropriation. Monet meant for it to be a comment on the Japanese fad at the time. Like, that was the whole point. Quickly, this became divisive. Some people thought it was super offensive and wanted the museum to stop. There were groups formed like Stand Against Yellowface at the MFA, and some protesters outside the museum held signs like, try on the kimono and learn what it's like to be a racist imperialist today. Their stance did make a good point in that the museum wasn't necessarily trying too hard to educate the public about Japanese culture. Instead, it was just highlighting this one French painting, not even any Japanese paintings, and the act of posing in the kimono. There was nothing all that educational about it. And I get it, it was very superficial, very gimmicky, mostly a way to promote the museum on social media and get people to use their hashtags. Then there were counter-protesters. Some Japanese individuals say they were proud of others trying on the kimono and having attention and admiration brought onto a piece of their culture. I get that too. So what do you think? Was Kimono Wednesdays a good or bad thing? Maybe just a silly passé trend? Did Monet have any business painting this pseudo-Japanese scene in the first place? Or is the fact that he painted it at all simply a marker, a screen capture of a time and place in history? I mean, it happened. Good, bad, or indifferent, it happened. And so maybe ignoring it doesn't fix any of humanity's problems. Tell me what you think in the comments. I did get the pleasure of viewing the painting at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston in 2018. I didn't realize it was on display there, and I got super excited as soon as I entered the room and saw it. The life-size scale totally caught me by surprise. I'm not sure why I thought it was much smaller, only having it known from internet and books. It's 91¼ tall by 56 wide. It's beautiful, simply enjoyable for the senses, with its texture and color and detail. I got a wonderful view of the effect of impressionistic technique up close, with how it looks like a loose, hot mess, but resolves itself and looks just as intended a few steps away, at a better viewing distance. The kimono feels voluminous. Parts of the embroidery look perfectly shiny, like metallic silk. Camille's expression is playful, and clearly very posed, but still very spontaneous. It gives the impression of being like a quick snapshot of a moment, but captured in paint. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you find these moments and stories in history as interesting as I do. If you enjoyed this video, I'd deeply appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe for more art-related content.